Hello and welcome to episode 127 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by friends of the show, Chris Bello and Matt Mancuso. Guys, thanks a lot for coming on. It's been a slow winter outside of the last week or so, but the Mets have made some moves. In the middle, it seems like seemingly in the middle of the night last night, the Mets traded for Luis Roberts from the White Sox. So they seemingly have their center fielder now for 2026. Another Luis Angel Acuna goes packing for this Luis, along with a minor league arm not named Luis, but we'll get to another Luis pitcher later in the show. But listen, I feel like this guy's name has been linked to the Mets for the last couple of years. Last couple of years offensively, he's been a sub 700 OPS guy, but we know, what his ceiling can be with the bat. We know he's a good defensive center fielder. So this, does some things, a couple of things for the Mets, I would say. Obviously, you didn't give up a ton to get him, so you like the trade in that respect. You still have prospect capital to go out and get arms, which they're still going to need. They could still definitely do that. This doesn't hurt that at all. And now Carson Bench can get his feet wet seemingly in left field. He doesn't have to, start out of the gate in center field. I don't think the Mets really wanted to do that. And I don't think they loved having the prospect of Tyrone Taylor starting the season, playing every day. Listen, he's, like I said, he's a player that's had some injury history. A guy the last couple of years offensively hasn't been great, but on the White Sox, not a great team. Maybe a change of scenery. Getting thrust hopefully into a playoff chase here can kind of re-unlock the player that he was. But, Matt, I'll start with you. Just want to get reactions here to the trade.
Yeah, I think it's a great deal. I think there are a few different avenues that you can explore um, this Robert deal through. There's, the understanding that, hey, he was a great White Sox. He had some great years. And then he had some years where he was a lot more of a floor guy. Like if you're looking through the WAR lens, he contributed like 1 to 2 WAR a year, but you can argue that his ceiling was as high as 5 WAR, which he did a couple of years ago, and that made arguably him an MVP candidate. And obviously, that's who the Mets are hoping to get. And just looking into the numbers, I think there's definitely a lot of bright spots on his profile, like some that I haven't seen publicly yet. So just want to acknowledge those. He had a great run with the White Sox. He was the third White Sox to have 100 home runs and 100 stolen bases. And I really think that just shows the impact he had on that organization. The first thing I want to do is the first way I want to analyze it is through the positional lens. Yes, he's going to come into center field. Yes, he's going to probably take the starting job right now. That was ticketed for Carson Bench, who can go and develop in AAA more. Um, he's also going to, push Tyrone Taylor, and it's not only he's there to just sit in a position. He was really good at the position last year. If you're looking at it through fielding run value, which is available on Baseball Savant, he was if he were on the Mets last year and had the same defense, he was the fourth most valuable Met. And, obviously that's a big point of emphasis that David Stearns had on this offseason. So not only do the Mets really have an elite center fielder, just talking again from the fielding lens, but they have an elite fielding shortstop. They have an elite fielding second baseman. If you look at the teams who have these combinations, it's the Brewers, it's the Dodgers, it's teams that David Stearns have worked for and emulated. The Astros are also on that list. So I thought that was really interesting. Hitting wise, it's no secret that the last 2 years haven't been optimal for Luis Robert. But again, looking into the numbers a little bit deeper, I think there are some numbers that really bode well for his future. So first of all, if you look at his expected production versus his actual production, there's a pretty big gap in that, and that's because he got a bit unlucky last year. If you look at his batting average on balls in play, so BABIP, which is usually around like 310 for him, last season it kind of dropped, and it really shows how random a season can be. And so it dropped 40 points, and that caused his production to really correspondingly fall 40 points. So yes, on paper, it's probably, like a 20th percentile hitting. That's how he ended last year. But if you look at it through the expected lens, it's actually like more middle of the pack, which combined with like Sterling center field defense, I think is a really good combination. He has the tools. So I saw this on Twitter or X, the Everything app. Um, he is one of the few players to have 90th percentile in both his sprint speed and his bat speed. So I think that's like a really neat part of his profile. Yes, he does chase. Yes, he does whiff. Yes, that will always be part of the profile. He succeeded in 2023. um, with a really bad chase and whiff rate. But I don't think that's just a characteristic of his profile. He's always going to have. What I really like to see is that his pull rate rose, his whiff on fastballs dropped, his swing and strike rate dropped last year. So despite all these fallacies, I think there is this player that the Mets think they can unlock, and you saw that in July coming up to the trade deadline. In the month of July, he had a 990 OPS, and digging a little deeper, I think I found the reason why, and that's because he had the best bat speed of the year in July. So maybe the Mets can put him on a bat speed program, um, and really show what he showed in July, and do their best to have it uh, be sustainable throughout the entire season.
Yeah, I think that basically just sums up everything that Luis Robert Jr. does so perfectly. And honestly, from a reaction standpoint, shout out to my friend Kyle, who is the biggest Mets fan and honestly one of my favorite people on the planet. I'm sitting down and I'm watching the PWHL game last night. I'm watching some Seattle Torrent, and I get a text and it just says Lou Bob. And I'm like, no. I'm like, no way. Did they actually do it? And I saw the trade and I saw Luis Angel Acuna, and I was like, really? We had heard like Mark Vientos and maybe Jonah Tong and maybe Jet Williams and all these guys thrown around the deadline last year, where I was thinking, God, I really love the player and I really love what he can be, and what Matt was alluding to with all the ifs, and if he's healthy and if he is able to get on the field and find that home run swing again, and if he can carry this team into the playoffs, like it's great. But I don't know if it's worth giving up these blue chip guys. And when I finally saw it unfold, and when I finally saw it being Luis Angel Acuna and then Truman Pauly, who, for those who don't know, was actually a pretty decent reliever out of Harvard. He had a good fall league with the Mets last year. I was like, all right, like this is what I thought that the Mets could pull to get a Luis Robert Jr. Give up a prospect in Luis Angel Acuna, who, let's face it, he's a great utility player. He can play all around the diamond. Maybe he'll give you a WAR or two at the end of the year, but he's not an everyday player. And a reliever that strikes out a lot of guys, but I mean, 96 miles an hour in today's league is a dime a dozen. You can find guys who throw 96 in almost every league now. I've not only felt pretty confident that the Mets just pulled off kind of a heist, but it also just shores up everything now. Because at the end of the day, the Mets really needed a center fielder. And we were all talking about it before the show, especially you, Sal, when you said the Mets really need a guy to play in center field so you can have Bench be in left field. So you can maybe let Jorge Polanco or one of the younger kids play first. Cody Bellinger always kind of seemed like a fit, but the defensive metrics weren't great in center field. Or you could put him in left field and force Carson Bench to not only come up and produce offensively, but also to come up and produce defensively in one of the hardest positions to play in all of Major League Baseball. So it fits like a baseball in a glove. And I am super excited to watch and see Luis Robert Jr. play, because honestly, I think the Mets' flexibility this season is going to allow him to be healthy. Needs a day off to get off his legs? Go put Tyrone Taylor in center field. Let him DH for a couple of games. Played 105 games last season in center field, only a couple at DH. I think that should probably change for this upcoming season.
Yeah, something you alluded to is Acuna was now expendable. The team has Beatty, the team has Vientos, the team has Mauricio. At the end of the day, it was someone had to go, and unfortunately for him, it was Luis Angel Acuna. But the White Sox seem really excited to get him. It's same with Truman Pauly. He was a guy whose fastball had some intriguing traits, and he had a couple breaking balls that had really good movement. Um, but the Mets pitching apparatus is really good, and they have a lot of these kind of gems pop up and come out of nowhere. And he was just another example of one of the Mets' successes in their pitching development. So, a couple of other Paulies are probably going to make their way through the pipeline, and the Mets can use that as trade currency, as they did midway through last year with Nate Dom and Frank Elias. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Um, but it's part of the organizational revamp of not only are the Mets going to develop at the majors well, but they're also going to put a lot of time, money, and effort into their minor league development. And we saw an example of that last night when they traded one of their success stories away.
Yeah, I mean, looking into it more, if I'm not mistaken, Roberts is a rental, correct? Is he a free agent at the end of the year?
So the Mets have a club option.
So, I mean, to me, that makes this even better. I mean, again, Acuna's a good player, a lot of speed, good defender. That's obviously something you like. He's a young guy. But to your points, there's a logjam here of other young players that are probably and should get more of the rope here. It's just not, a place for him to play every day. He's not an everyday player. So for the Mets to get this, like you said, I just think that itself makes the trade worth it. I mean, obviously, I guess the floor is a more expensive Tyrone Taylor because obviously the defensive prowess between the two is there. We're just hoping, Robert's offensive ceiling compared to the two. But like I said, for what you gave up to still to get a player with this ceiling and now still to have all your prospect capital to, like I keep banging the drum, to get pitching, they're still in a very good position to do so. So I think all around, from that perspective, what he's making 22 million or something like that, the Mets are paying him. I think that's totally fine for what they gave up. And at the very least, like I said, you're getting, a premium defender and a guy that can, hopefully maybe run into like 20 home runs, which is something the Mets haven't had in center field probably for a while. There was one center fielder. We'll get to that. Actually, he was good. He's going into the Hall of Fame. We'll get to that later. But it's like I said, decent move. A lot more. Like I would think more to be made, at least on the pitching side. It'll be interesting to see. But the Mets, we talked about it the last show. They have prospect capital to play with, and that's something they shouldn't sit on. And for getting a deal like they did here with Roberts, I think it's a definite win. And we'll see what happens here. A player I've been thinking about too. Just thinking about the outfield they traded for last year. Was Jose Siri a rental last year? Or is he still on the roster?
I believe he's in AAA right now.
Wow.
I believe the Mets put him through the DFA process and no team claimed him.
And you just talk about some depth there too. A guy that you maybe even, can replace Tyrone Taylor down the line. Someone with a bit more pop, same thing. He didn't really get to play a lot last year. So, I think the outfield has gone from a bit of a worry here to you look at going left to right, Benj, Roberts, and Soto. I think you'll take that. Obviously, you have to see if Benj makes the team out of camp and what he can be. But, like I said, I think this is a trade you should be happy about. And we'll see how it goes. But Roberts' new teammate, Bo Bichette, I believe yesterday had his press conference. Was that, announced at the stadium.
Took questions a little earlier today, actually.
It was a little earlier today. So
yes.
It was even sooner. They introduced him at the stadium. Pictures were great. He's wearing 19. I believe his dad might have worn that number. That's why he picked it, which is pretty cool. But, again, a guy that seems to say all the right things, talked about why he wanted to be here and how it seemed to be coming to fruition, excited to compete for a World Series, all that sort of thing. Mets got their right-handed bat, and they got their bat to hit behind Soto. I mean, we talked about it a few days ago when it happened. But, I'm really excited. And the fact that he's willing to play third base, he talked about how playing in the World Series and changing positions, just, the fact that you want to win and help the ball club kind of change his mindset and all that's why he was willing to move positions. But excited, good young player. The knee thing always worries you, but, hopefully between third base and DH, which, again, we talked about the other day, should keep him upright and on the field. But, very excited for a player like that to be stepping into the clubhouse. And, hopefully doing big things in the middle of the order for the team.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot in our last podcast, Sal, when Matthias was with us. He just evens out the lineup so perfectly. Mm-hmm. And almost similar to what we were talking about with Bo Bichette, is kind of the same with Luis Robert Jr. It's just another guy who has the potential to hit 20 home runs and also steal 20 to 30 bases.
Sure.
And that's kind of become the identity of the team over the last year and a half. And you get a guy like Bichette, you get a guy like Robert Jr., obviously Francisco Lindor, and who knows with Juan Soto if he's going to be able to replicate last year on the base paths. But it's just another guy that just fits the mold. And I thought what was really interesting about the press conference from earlier today, I forget who asked it, so I apologize to whichever reporter asked this question, but they asked David Stearns, was this the plan to build a contact-oriented team, which we had spoken about on the podcast before the press conference? And he kind of chuckled and was like, it just ended up being like that. We were just trying to find guys who would give us very competitive at-bats, which I think is pretty telling to last season with how the season ended in September. And it just ended up being that they were all contact guys. And that's kind of how the Blue Jays were built last year when they went to the World Series. You go up and down that lineup with the Bo Bichette, with the Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Addison Barger, Ernie Clement, all of those guys that felt like you could never get them out. And if you did get them out, you wiped sweat off your brow because they lined out to left field. So the team itself is just built so much differently than last year. And one actual final thing I do want to touch on with Luis Robert Jr., because we were kind of talking about it while transitioning to Bichette. We're talking about a potential top 10 player in the sport. Like that's how confident I am in Robert Jr. We always like to allude to the 2023 where he put up the 5-WAR season. Go look at the season. I believe it was 2 years earlier than that. It was in 2021. He put up 3.7 B-WAR in 68 games before getting hurt. I mean, he was on pace to put up almost an 8-WAR season, which is just, it's like Aaron Judge level. So if he's healthy and he can be in center field every day and play premium position, we're looking at like a 6 to 7 WAR player. That's how good Luis Robert is. So I understand everybody sees the 680 OPSs the last 2 years and he can't stay healthy. And the easy comp is just a better hitting Tyrone Taylor. But we're talking about maybe, if healthy, the best center fielder in the sport. Like, that's how good this guy is. So if the Mets can even get 60% of that, 70% of that, they're going to be a playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's high praise, right? That's what the Mets did for that, especially like I said, the package that went through. You'll take that risk for the ceiling of that player all day. And now coupled with another big right-handed bat in Bichette, who consistently is one of the more clutch hitters in the sport, especially with runners on. It's a really good point about this being a contact-oriented team. I go back to the 2015 Royals, who the Mets power pitching could not get out because that was a team who did more damage, it felt like, with 2 strikes and always put the ball in play and made the defense make a play and always put pressure on. So they're clearly a philosophical, you know what I'm saying, change is happening here with Stearns. So, we'll see how it goes. Where the power output comes, that's where Bichette comes in here. Obviously losing Alonso is going to be a big key to that. And we'll see how they replicate that production at first base. Seems like they got 2 or 3 guys that they can plug and play to do that with. But it'll be interesting. It's just interesting in general how we'll see how this clubhouse dynamic is. I think that was a big emphasis. I think that was another reason why they brought Bichette in. Seems to be a high praise guy with that. Obviously, we know that was probably the bulk of it with Simeon outside of moving an outfield spot to get rid of Nimmo. But just really interesting to see how all these new guys gel with the Sotos and Lindors of the world. I saw Lindor came out with the new shoe. He's at the Australian Open doing that whole thing. That was cool. You just wonder how these guys are all going to gel. Obviously, once things got bad last year, you heard kind of those rumblings of, with Lindor and Soto not being the best of friends and different types of personalities, whatever. They've made changes. Those are 2 guys that are obviously the 2 pillars of the team, 2 core guys that they're building around. So it'll just be really interesting to see how these new, set and group and philosophy molds in the clubhouse. I'm sure Mendoza's eagerly awaiting to see too.
And I think it's really interesting that, like, minutes after Luis Robert was traded to the Mets, like, a White Sox reporter went out of his way online and was just like, "Hey, Luis Robert has a great work ethic. He's great in the clubhouse." And these rumblings were also kind of stated about Bo Bichette when he signed with the Mets. And not only are they getting like an elite talent, they are also getting a great clubhouse guy. And yes, you heard some internal strife in their clubhouse last year. It's always a bit difficult on the outside, from the outside. But yeah, the Mets had to make changes to their clubhouse, and Bo Bichette's an excellent name. Some people consider the Bo Bichette signing to be like a knee-jerk reaction to the Dodgers signing Kyle Tucker. Their argument was the Mets needed a plan B, and the B stood for Bo. But in this case, Bo Bichette's just a really good baseball player, and these conversations were going on for for months before the signing. So he's an elite talent. I think he's going to be an excellent fit to the Mets. If you go through his numbers, through his expected stats, the offense really, the actual offense really supports the predicted stats. So I feel very comfortable in saying he's going to be a really good fit for the Mets next year because, as Sal alluded to earlier, or maybe it was Chris, you can give these guys days at the DH spot if Bichette's knee is acting up. If Robert needs a day off as his hamstring issues come back, the DH spot's an open door. It's not when you have like Daniel Vogelback on the team who's tied into that spot every day, but instead they have a lot of flexibility, and that's something that I think is really important to this team. Um, so not only do they have the ability to kind of, I don't want to say cash in because it's referring to prospects as like currency. But not only are they able to trade away really young talent like Pauly, but they're also able to extend payroll flexibility and have some uh, open payroll to take on money in deals, such as they did with Louise Roberts, such as they did with um, a Bo Bichette deal that's going to cost them, maybe not to Bichette, but on field, it's going to cost the Mets about $90 million next year when you include Bichette's salary. And you also include the luxury tax penalties. So the Mets are paying a high price for Bichette, but based on his historical production and based on his historical expected production, I think it's going to be well worth it to get the team closer to a World Series championship.
Yeah, and cashing in on those prospects is something that we've talked about so many times. I feel like every single time I've been on this podcast, at least with you, Sal, and it really just all comes back to you have the number one farm system in baseball. Francisco Lindor is on the wrong side of 30, and there's a lockout right on the doorstep in 2027. So if you got a guy like Chet Williams, who maybe you have to move because you've got AJ Ewing and Mitch Voigt, and like we mentioned, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, and all of these guys that are coming through the pipeline, why not move one for, say, like a Tarek Skubal or, like a Freddy Peralta? Why not do that? You have to at some point because let's be honest, not all of them are all-stars. Not all of them are Hall of Famers. Not all of them might even be major league caliber players. I mean, at one point, Luis Angel Acuna was a top 30 prospect in baseball, and he was the number one prospect overall with the Texas Rangers. And to move him for a deal in Luis Robert, and when we eventually go up and down the baseball reference page in 10 years at the end of his career, I think even if he has 1 or 2 good years, we're going to come back and look and weigh how this went and go, yeah, that was worth it because the Mets either made the playoffs or they got a healthy year out of Luis Robert Jr. Or maybe it didn't work out, but it gave us this conversation. So eventually you have to move the prospects or you have to move somebody to put the prospect where they belong. And right now it just kind of seems like they have a logjam of infielders on their top 30 and they don't have enough arms in their rotation.
So, to your point, about 8 minutes ago, Joel Sherman just put out a tweet. Brewers have asked on Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams in a Peralta trade. Tobias Mayers would go to the Mets in the deal if finalized, and it is progressing. That was at 9:17. So, seems like the Mets are being active and trying to get a starter. To your point, Chris, obviously everybody wants Skubal, right? He's the best pitcher in the world. I doubt at this point the Tigers are moving Skubal a month before spring training. I think the fan base would burn the city of Detroit down. 1 and 2. They've made the playoffs the last 2 years. It's hard to justify that. And if they wait until the deadline to see if they're in it or not, they're going to get just as big a haul, whether they did it before the season or at the deadline. He's that good. So if you're them, I would imagine that they're smart enough to hold on to him at least for a few more months. Obviously, I would want him, but I don't think that's going to happen now. But Peralta's intriguing. It's annoying because he's a 1-year rental. You don't want to give up a ton for a guy who pitches 4 or 5 innings every 5 days. That's kind of the knock on him. But the Mets need someone to man the staff. It's not fair to ask Nolan McLean to be the number one starter and kind of be the bulldog ace, whatever you want to call it. They need more. If they wanted to get creative, maybe it's not necessarily Freddy Peralta. Maybe there's someone that we're not thinking of, a younger pitcher that has control and a team that they can, like we've talked about, get blown away. In an offer that the Mets have that sort of advantage, with their prospect capital, but we'll see. It's interesting. As we're talking here, the Mets are trying to add pitching as well. It seems like the last week, now that they lost out on Tucker, this has been a pivot in a positive way to get the fire moving, I guess. Matt, you look very eager to say something.
Yeah, so Joel Sherman isn't the only one to report it. It's not Jeff Passan yet, but John Heyman is also reporting that talks are progressing for the Mets
Okay.
to trade Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat for Freddy Peralta and Tobias Myers. And as of now, it's looking, based on the reporting, it's looking like it's a very close deal to be done. My gut check is this is a great deal for New York. I've seen Jet Williams in Binghamton over the last few years. He's an excellent player. He is going to be an excellent fit for the Brewers, who really value contact. They really value multiple position flexibility. Brandon Sproat seemed like a little bit of the odd man out when it came to the Mets. Um, he's maybe their 6-7 starter right now. They have a lot of uh, depth in their starting pitching, especially in their lower starting pitching. So yes, you have your headliners for the Mets who are going to go and lead the front of the system. You have Nolan McLean. You have, I'm going to put Clay Holmes in there because he pitched really well last year. But Freddy Peralta is the next step up. He is your game one. I mean, depending, of course, how McLean progresses. But right now, he's your game one starter. So this is a great deal. And another thought that's popping in my head is, yes, hey, Freddy Peralta is a free agent at the end of this season, but the Mets could extend him because David Stearns has worked, with Peralta throughout his time in Milwaukee. So that's always an option. And the Mets, as we've talked about on this podcast, are very willing to flex uh, their payroll flexibility. So yeah, this is a great deal. Tobias Myers, I'm even a big fan of. There was some research that was released a couple of years ago that yes, Tobias Myers throws his fastball at 91, 92. But what I really like is based on research that's released from Baseball Savant. He tunnels his pitches really well, and the Mets have an amazing pitching development system. So I think he's going to come to New York and fulfill any promise. He was really interesting to me a couple of years ago when he pitched against the Mets in the Wild Card Series, and I've always been intrigued with him since. So my gut reaction is, hey, this is a great deal for New York. Jet Williams is going to be a really good baseball player. You saw Brandon Sprout make his major league debut last year. He's going to be a really good major league pitcher. But the Mets needed an ace, and tonight they seem like they're on their way to getting that ace.
Yeah, it would be a great deal if it ends up going through. I don't even, I don't even know what to make of reports. Two teams are talking. I hope those talks lead to something. But Freddie Peralta, I mean, the volume speaks for itself. He's a great pitcher. He would be able to pitch in the top three of a playoff series. That's something the Mets do not have right now. Of course, there's Nolan McLean, but outside of that, is David Peterson going to be healthy at the end of the year? Is Clay Holmes going to be reliable come September, October, if the Mets make it there? I don't know. So they almost need a Freddie Peralta if they're going to compete for a pennant. And then Tobias Myers, kind of what you alluded to, Matt. He was fantastic in that game 3. The Mets couldn't touch him. I remember I was actually at the Citi Field watch party, and I was just watching him mow down the Mets with my Yankee friend. And it just got to a point where we just started talking about fantasy football because we were like, this game's over. Like, it's so unfair the way that he would throw like 92, 93, and just everyone's swinging under it. And you're like, oh my God. Meanwhile, I couldn't hit 60 miles an hour if I was put in the cage right now. So, but yeah, Tobias Myers would be a great ad. He's kind of like a right-handed Aaron Ashby in the sense of his role, where he can make a start if somebody gets injured. When he came up in his rookie year, he had 138 innings, but then he kind of got moved to that swingman role that made a spot start every now and then. So it's just another controllable arm that's proven at the major league level that can go out there and starter, can't make it through the 3rd or 4th inning like last year. Well, here comes Tobias Myers to come clean it up for another 3 or 4.
And I think the Mets really missed that last year. They didn't really have anyone in the Trevor Williams role who came in, who was a swingman, who provided just quality innings. You had the guys that would get yo-yoed in between AAA and fill that role, such as like Brandon Waddell, Justin Hageman, and they were good. But I think to have someone a bit more reliant to do that, and to have a bit more of a sustainable player that would go and eat those innings, I think is perfect. And I think Tobias Meyer is the first is one of the best guys for that role. As of now, based on John Heyman's and Joel Sherman's reporting, this is looking like a very close deal. So I wouldn't be shocked to hear anything official tonight. Sorry, I wouldn't be shocked to hear it official tonight. Just based on the Heyman and the Sherman reports, because they usually don't come out unless something is progressing and very, very close to the finish line. And I think Freddy Peralta is going to fit in really well in Citi Field. The Mets have a clear need for him. He came up obviously as a reliever to help the Brewers postseason push, and he's excelled as a starter. He's one of the most underrated starters in the sport. And overall, again, this week has just been full of it, but I think this is another wonderful deal for New York.
Yeah, interesting, right? You hate to lose Jet Williams. I feel like I've heard his name a ton over the last few years. Someone I was excited to eventually see in the big league club. But you got to give to get. We talked about it when you have prospect capital. You can't hold on to everybody forever. And the Mets need arms. Like you said, Peralta's a guy that's pretty underrated as a starter. I would love to see him pitch more deeper in the games. But that's an issue for another day. But that's why you got Tobias Myers with them, right? Arms, arms, arms. That's what you want. So, if this is a trade that does happen, you heard it here first of all. And, it's just something the Mets had to do. And, I would be excited if it does happen. Again, Freddy Peralta's a rental. I would hate to give up Jet Williams for that more than anything. I feel like Sprode is the odd man out. I agree with what you guys are saying there. But if AJ Ewing is, supposedly a better version of a Jet Williams, then again, this is why the Mets have the number one farm system in the sport, and they have capital that's able to leverage with. So hopefully it goes through. Hopefully it happens sooner than later. Maybe it happen while we're still here. We could stall for a little while until maybe it gets official. But it's another good night, I think. Again, Mets didn't seem, outside of Jet Williams, who is going to be, I do think will be a good major league player, not giving up a ton to get back, especially for someone that could kind of head their rotation now and lengthen everything out in the starting staff. So that would be awesome. Speaking of pitching, I guess I want to mention this real quick. The Mets did sign another Luis too. They signed Luis Garcia for the bullpen. Pitched for a few teams last year, one of them being the Dodgers. Kind of a career reliever, like a career 4 ERA kind of guy. Like I said, more arms the better. The Mets need them in that bullpen after losing the best closer in the sport and replacing them with the less good version. So, the more the better. So we'll take it. I that's kind of all I have to say about that. And that's where Stearns usually excels, right? Finding those kind of diamonds in the rough, so to speak, especially in the bullpen. So hopefully there's a lot of diamonds to be brushed off here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good signing. The Mets need as many depth arms as they can get. We really saw how important they were last offseason. They would come into games. I mentioned Waddell and Higginman. But even their hedges and buffers against a Kodai Senga injury risk. Clay Holmes had a very healthy season, but we'll see if that continues in 2026. Obviously, you'd hope so. But the same thing with Nolan McLean. It's buffer and it's depth to use just in case the Mets do have any injury concerns. In some of their starting staff, they were very lucky to last year, and also the more pitchers the better, and hopefully they're acquiring 2 more tonight in Myers and Peralta.
Yeah, Luis Garcia throws 97 miles an hour, can get some ground balls. They just short up the defense behind him. So I don't expect him to be anything more than maybe like a 5th or 6th inning guy when somebody needs some rest. But kind of what we've been talking about all day is just getting pitching. And it's just another arm that can come in with that high velo. And it's, it's funny seeing Luis Garcia still because, he's been around in the league for so long time Philly, obviously. Back, in like 2013, 14, 15. And now here he is at 39 years old, pumping 97. So just kind of, for anybody who tries to tell you analytics don't exist and analytics are bad for the sport, look at 39-year-old Luis Garcia right now, pumping 97 right down the middle with a 2-seamer.
I'll bring up something that I kind of found interesting about him. He's a supinator, which means his on a very just general side as stuff moves east to west. So he throws a sinker, he throws a slider. And he made a change last year that I'm sure the Mets were aware of and apparent of, and I'm sure they made the signing based on what they saw, and that he changed the shape of his sweeper, so it had a lot less vertical drop, and that really increased his output in Fangraphs' stuff model. It was 12% better. Sorry, his slider was 12% better than the average slider in Major League Baseball in 2024. In 2025, when he threw that slider, because of the change in shape, it was 23% better. So I'm sure the Mets saw that change. They liked it, and they one reason he probably made that deal is noting the difference in shape.
Say that word again, supinator?
Yes.
It's good this season for
Yeah.
supinator. I had chicken supinator the other night. It's cold. You got to have that. But last thing here, we're going to transition now to past players. Hall of Fame announcement. One former Met already got the call, Jeff Kent, but another one got the call yesterday. Carlos Beltran going in this year, along with Andrew Jones, who Mets fans know, unfortunately, very well. Listen, the two best center fielders of their generation. I've always said if I needed someone my life depended on, a ball had to get ran down in the gap. Andrew Jones is the man who's grabbing that ball for me, always, forever. Best defensive center fielder I've ever seen. As far as Beltran goes, 5-tool player, probably maybe the best overall player the Mets maybe have had. Unfortunately, gets remembered for one really good curveball, that a game that I was at, and unfortunately, I'll never forget for the rest of my life, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive him for. But he was a really good player outside of that. I didn't realize he had 435 home runs as a switch hitter. That's crazy. Obviously, tremendous defensive center fielder, stole bases. Really, like I said, a real 5-tool player in center. Was a great player for the Mets out, like I said, outside of that one pitch that everyone remembers, but he was a real offensive threat. Remember them fondly of that 06 team and those late teams where you wish he had more chances in the postseason. Didn't happen, but obviously a great player. And I think if the sign stealing thing didn't happen, he obviously would have gotten much sooner. I think he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. But interesting. He had to pay his little dues for that for a couple of years. The writers, made him kind of sweat it out for a little while. Now he's a Hall of Famer. Mets congratulate him. I saw an article saying, is there a chance maybe in the next year or two the Mets retire his number 15? Imagine that swing. You get fired as the manager after a sign stealing scandal that happened after you retire, before you were retired, and then they're going to put your numbers in the rafter. That would be a weird thing. I don't think he necessarily deserves it anyway. The Mets don't need to be retiring everybody's number. I think that's a special thing, but obviously very deserving of the Hall of Fame. And I guess we'll see what cap he wears. I would think he's going to wear a Mets cap. That's where he spent the prime of his career, but who knows? Some guys going without a cap, right? He played for a bunch of teams, so we'll see. And I know it was kind of a weird relationship here. I feel like at times, especially with injuries and things like that, we've heard stories with past ownership that wanted him to not get surgeries for things, and he did it without. There was some drama with that sort of thing. So, but he was, definitely a really good Met. Like I said, just wish he had more postseason chances, but we'll kind of end the show just talking about wrapping up on that.
So yeah, I mean, something that I think is interesting with that is, yes, you mentioned that he was fired as manager of the Mets because of his role in the
Was he even the manager for a week?
I think it was like 5 days.
Wow.
But yes, but he's also worked in the front office over the last few years. So I do think that might tilt the cap selection towards the Mets. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, um, I think it's kind of low. But it's always nice to have another Met in the Hall of Fame. And I think he probably will wear a Mets hat. Just thinking about it too, if we could go back to Peralta, I haven't seen anything official yet, but I'm wondering, because we talked about Peralta signing an extension after the deal, I wonder if this deal is contingent on Peralta signing an extension with the Mets, because
Interesting.
that's existed before. I forget an exact example. I want to say it was maybe with Johan, though don't quote me on that. So I do wonder if that's maybe a blocking point and a reason why we're hearing some your rumors, but nothing cemented in stone yet. If this deal is contingent on Freddy Peralta signing a extension with the Mets. He's 30 years old. The Mets are obviously not going to sign him to a 6-year, 7-year extension, but something that covers his years in his young 30s. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting. What I'm kind of shocked about is every single move that the Mets have made this offseason, there's been, outside of like literally just Will Salmon getting a report from the Athletic, there's been nothing. So I'm kind of shocked that this is being leaked, which I don't really know the severity of it. I don't think anybody really knows. Who knows? Maybe it's they want Brandon Sproat, and David Stearns is saying you can have Jack Wenninger instead, and maybe like Chris Suero. So who knows? That is kind of an interesting point that this is like the first time we've really gotten an actual leak of something happening. But yeah, I'm not sure what could be contingent on Freddy Peralta being moved here. The touch on the Carlos Beltran stuff. I'm glad he got put in as a Mets fan because if Mickey Mantle didn't exist, he would quite literally be probably the best switch hitting outfielder of all time. I mean, we're talking about somebody who has the 4th most home runs as a switch hitter. He's just so excellent. And, it's funny, Sal, we mentioned the curveball so much because we're Mets fans. I mean, this is one of the greatest postseason hitters of all time. That's what he's known for. He's known for crushing the ball.
That run with the Astros was insane.
Yeah, run with the Astros, the Cardinals in 2012, and then 13 when they made the World Series against, the Red Sox.
The Red Sox, yep.
He was decent with the Yankees in 15. He helped the Rangers in 2016. And, of course, at the time, we thought he had helped the Astros in 17. And I think that's probably the most interesting.
He definitely helped.
Well, he helped them during the regular season, too, allegedly. So it's going to be interesting because they put Carlos Beltran in, but that almost opens the door now because it's like, how do you not put Jose Altuve in now? And how do you not put Carlos Correa in if he is able to stay healthy and put up the stats? Maybe an Alex Bregman. So it's very interesting about how they're going to handle the other Astros. And also, maybe it opens the door for the steroid users. I'm not sure. But, I mean, it's just another instance of a known cheater, I hate to say it, being put in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think I do think that Beltran's election, which I personally think was a little bit overdue, is going to open the door for the Bregmans, for the Correas to enter in the Hall of Fame. What I also find really interesting as it connects to the Mets, there is a Jeff Passan tweet that the Mets have acquired Freddy Peralta for Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. One more big league pitcher will head to the Mets. The deal is done.
All right. So there you have it, guys. Freddy Peralta, the new ace of the Mets. There we go. For Jet Williams, and like you said, another. Now it's not confirmed who the other arm is going to be. Is that correct? That's going to happen.
According to Jeff Passan, it is not. Our own Mike Mayer did just break that it is Tobias Mayer.
Okay, so there you go, guys. And is it Sproat and Williams? Are those the two
Sproat
guys?
And Williams. Okay. Yeah, this is a really good deal for the Mets. Again, I'm really curious about an extension. Just to bring back a quick point for 2 seconds, just because it connects with the Mets. The other thing about Hall of Fame voting is that Felix Hernandez got a very large share of votes because of his short peak. I wonder if that one day opens the door for David Wright, who also had that very similar short peak, but in that short peak, he did very well. He's obviously one of the best in the league. Anyway, back to Freddy Peralta. Again, this is a heist for the Mets. They're making move after move after move. It's all systematic, and this, no doubt, makes the Mets a better ball club in 2026 and makes the Mets we sign them to an extension, a better ball club for years to come.
Yeah, you would think an extension is likely here, or they feel confident in that, but they wouldn't be giving up Sproat and Williams, two guys that they're very. I mean, I forgot. I think they drafted Sproat twice, so the organization has really been high on him. So they must be confident that they're going to extend Peralta. I guess we'll see over the coming days what happens there. But for now, at least for 2026, the Mets they have their ace. This is a guy, like I said, doesn't pitch deep in the ball games, but if you can have length in the bullpen, you can save that. But this is now length for the starting staff too. And just to your quick point on David Wright, if David Wright won an MVP in 07 or 08 and had a World Series under his belt, I'd agree with you. But none of those happened, so it's not going to happen for him. I love him.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Unfortunately, if you can blame two collapses for that, because if the Mets, Jimmy Rollins in 2008 was really good. But if the Mets make the playoffs one of those years, win the division, I think David Wright gets an MVP one of those years, and it's a different conversation. But it's sad. He literally gave his whole body to the Mets, but we love him anyway. Thank you, David, for your service.
Can I sneak in a PSA before we end this episode?
Sure.
In regards to extending Peralta and signing players to these contract extensions, I want to send out a little PSA to Mets fans. Just because you want a player and Steve Cohen doesn't get him or extend him does not mean he's poor, and does not mean that the Mets don't have money, because we're seriously seeing selective choosing of who's getting added to this roster and who's not. I would say the only instance we've had so far is like Edwin Diaz not being re-signed, because I think the Mets got a little too cute with that contract negotiation. But Pete Alonso wants $150 million. Well, we don't have that money for you. But when we're already over the luxury tax and we want to go add 20 more million and then pay that 20 million again to the league for Luis Robert Jr., we'll go do that. So if Freddy Peralta is excellent here, I'm sure David Stearns loves him because he's already been a David Stearns guy. The Mets will extend him. I mean, we are so blessed to be in an era of Mets baseball where money does not matter. And maybe it's just because the Wilpons are far in the rearview mirror, or maybe you're not old enough to remember the Fred Wilpon era. But all three of us sat through the 2010, 11, 12, 13, dare I even say 14 season, when they finished in second with like 83 wins. And the big addition was Michael Kadire. And Ruben Tejada was the next Derek Jeter. So just, let's all relax. We've gotten our ace now. Boycott's over, right? We're all going to Citi Field for opening day, and let's all be happy for once, right?
Yeah, I mean, Peralta is a very well-rounded pitcher. So not only does his fastball succeed, but he dots it perfectly to the upper half of the zone. And that's because of a phenomenon called inverted vertical break. But he also succeeds with his all-speed pitches. Just looking at his baseball savant page right now, his breaking balls have a +8 run value, and his all-speed pitches have a +9. Both of those are at or above the 89th percentile in the majors when you look at all pitches from Major League Baseball last year. So the Mets got their ace. The Mets got their game one starter. That's something that I think really hurt them last year, and it's just another great day to be a Mets fan.
Yeah, and listen, as far as an extension goes, it's a lockout looming, right? I would imagine guys, if they have the chance to lock in a long term, they would want to do that with so much uncertainty ahead. But I don't know how that plays one way or another. We'll find out. But for right now, for 2026, like you said, the Mets have their number one starter, their game one starter, Freddy Peralta. So great time to pick a show to do tonight. A lot that we talked about. Great that the news broke while we were talking here. And they should do that more often. I'll talk to David Stearns. We'll coordinate that a little better moving forward. That's good. But great show, guys. Well, obviously we'll end it there, unless the Mets end up trading for Terry Skubal in the next 10 minutes. But great stuff. What a difference 2 weeks makes from the last time last couple of shows to now. Things have really gotten in gear. The stove is hot again. So, Mets fans should be excited. So, as always, everybody, let's go Mets. And hopefully this continues.